All right, everybody. So we are recording live from the internet. This is the January 2019 edition of the Manufacturing Marketo User Group. Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Tucker. I'm your your Marketo User Group leader for this session. That's the T-shirt. I'm also a Marketo certified expert and am a marketing technology consultant for the Conversion Store. So really want to welcome all of you and thank you all for coming to this session where our guest speaker today is Elliot Lowe. He's the head of marketing operations for RingLead. His topic today is about 10 ways to improve your database quality. Before we do kind of an introduction and kind of dive into kind of our agenda here, also want to take a moment for Taylor just to kind of do an introduction to yourself as well too. And Taylor will be moderating the chat room and then helping to lead us through a roll call of everybody's on the call today.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Infinger. Work as a consultant in technology for Annuitas right now, and I've been here for about 4 years. And I am a 3-time Marketo champion. I missed out on this last class because they had so many people apply, but still an alumni. And I've been leading the virtual mug groups and kind of helping, with anyone who's heading one up. We just started our first one in North America. I'm excited to work with Michael on this as well, as he's been killing it in the manufacturing virtual mug. So very excited there. And also have my MCSA and work in Salesforce. So excited for the meeting today and look forward to meeting everyone on the call.
Excellent. Really great. Thanks so much, Taylor, again, for jumping on to help here, especially with moderating with the group that we've got, which I think is a good group. I think we'll have a really good discussion today. So let's jump into the agenda really quickly, and then we'll kind of give Elliot as much time as we can. So I want to be really quick with this. So first thing, we'll do some group rules. We'll do a roll call. So everybody who's on this call, we expect you to just introduce yourself really quickly. We'll do some news and upcoming events, which really is going to be Adobe Summit, which is the big thing. Elliot is going to present, and then we'll have a question and answer session, which will not be recorded, just so that we can make it really open and honest, and everybody has a chance to be able to share in a safe space. And then also heads up, our next session we've already planned down. It's Thursday, February the 21st, so almost a month before Summit. And what I'd like to do is to be able to get a panel of people who can talk about Adobe Summit, about Marketo Summit, and sort of help to give you a lay of the land and some planning as you're all preparing your respective time to be able to fly in there and get the most out of that session. So, so foreshadow, that's what's happening. So let's talk a little bit about our group values first. And we discuss this at all of our sessions, but just to reiterate, if you're brand new, this is your first session. This is a very different than let's say a webinar where you would sit on the sidelines and listen to one speaker, in this case Elliot, just talk about best practices. This is intimate and interactive, and we fully have all of you off of mute and expect all of you to be able to contribute and participate and throw questions at Elliot or any of us, to be honest with you, so that we have an open and honest discussion. And I think that's the best way to be able to learn. So this is a safe space. There is no such thing as a dumb question unless it's a question that you don't ask. And so please ask whatever you want. And if you're uncomfortable doing it in the recording, that's why we have the chat room off of recording, and you can place that in there, and Taylor will throw out your question to Elliot and to the audience. It's a collaborative space. It is not a sales space. So there's nothing wrong with sales, but it's not really for this environment. We want to focus on learning, and the learning eventually, I mean, that can drive sales conversations at some point, but that's not our intent today. And also just to note, none of us are Marketo employees here. So it's important to be able to say that what we're doing here is strictly as users and enthusiasts and advocates and champions in the space. Should be a fun, enjoyable session. I'm a little bit of a joker. I like to have a good time. I like to work hard, but I also like to play hard as well too. And I think that's important for this session. And also they should be professional and add value. So at the end of the hour that you invested in this, you should be able to walk away from the session, unplug it, and be able to kind of say, I learned something out of this session that I can bring back to my job and my organization and make sure that my Marketo instance works in the best way possible because I attended this session. So we want you to walk away with a takeaway that's something you can use in your company. And so now let's jump into roll calls and just do one quick go around. So Taylor, I'm going to pull up the list of respondents. I think you can see them as well too if you click on the tab there. But if you can,
I can see them. You may just go through the row of people real quick.
yeah, just call everybody out, and everybody please introduce yourself and just give us your job title, company, and location really quickly.
Awesome. So I see we have Kara McPherson, I believe. I can't see your full name, but I see you there. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Kara McPherson. I work for Spider Design out of Oswego, Illinois, and I'm an account manager for one of our large construction equipment manufacturing companies.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. And Dan Stevens, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Dan Stevens, Senior Director, Digital Marketing at Avanade. We're based in Seattle, Washington. I'm physically located in Cleveland, Ohio.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And we've got a phone number, so I'll skip that one for now. If we missed you, we'll come back. But Jeff Krajewski, he is next.
Sure. Jeff Krajewski. I am the Marketing Automation Manager for AmeriCord Registry, Cord Blood Banking.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And then Arthur.
Arthur, I'm not sure if you can hear us or not. Arthur's based out of Paris, so he's in Paris, France. And I'm not sure if he's on the audio yet or not. I think he's been chatting though, so let me.
He said he can't really talk right now, but Arthur, we see you. Thanks for joining us today. All right, next up we've got Caitlin. Caitlin's on mute as well. So Caitlin, if you can come off mute, we'll come back to you in a second.
Let me see if I can unmute you here.
Hi, I'm here.
There you go.
Hey, Caitlin.
Sorry. I'm Caitlin. I am the Marketing Automation Supervisor at Carlisle Construction Materials, and we're based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. All right, next we've got Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I work for CNH Industrial, located in Racine, Wisconsin.
Thanks, Rachel. And next up, we've got Brianne or Brianna.
Hello, this is Brianne Foster. I am a digital marketing representative with Eastman Chemical Company based in Kingsport, Tennessee.
Awesome. Thanks, Brianne. And Carissa.
Yeah, hi, my name is Carissa Russell. I'm a marketing operations manager at Current Powered by GE, and we are based in Cleveland.
Awesome. Thanks, Carissa. And then Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Hesley. I'm the Digital Programs Manager at Edmond Optics in Barrington, New Jersey, which is just outside of Philadelphia.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And then Michael, you're next.
Michael Basil, right?
Hi, guys. I am a data specialist and a business development rep at RingLead, and I work side by side with Elliot, and it's a pleasure to join you guys today. We're located on Long Island.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And then Ryan.
Hey, Ryan, I don't think your audio is hooked up from what I can see here. Well, I can tell you, Ryan was one of our panelists actually in our December Manufacturing User Group. He's actually based here in Charlotte. He's in charge of the Marketo instance for Sealed Air Corp. And they're in packaged, they do packaging basically. They're the folks that invented bubble wrap, for example.
Cool. And I don't know if we miss anyone. There's another phone number on here, but there's not a name associated. Maybe someone just dialed in separately.
I think on that one, is that Elliot, or did you guys dial in, or are you on the video call?
I'm on direct connection, no dial in.
Okay. Okay.
I'm on an internet connection.
Okay. That might be.
It might be me. I dialed in.
Okay.
This is Emily.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So that takes us through everything. Thank you so much, Taylor. I really appreciate that a lot. Glad to be able to meet everybody. I think that helps us to get a sense of who's on the call, of course, as we're getting into discussion periods and question and answers. We'll definitely ask questions of you as well, too, to be able to share about your different experiences with Marketo. I think that leaves for a livelier discussion once we all know about that. So let's talk a little bit about upcoming news and events. And really the big thing that we want to talk about is Adobe Summit, which is Marketo Summit folded in with Adobe. So you get 2 conferences for the price of 1. It's going to be running in Las Vegas from March 24th to 28th. So a little bit tighter in terms of timeline, but also, double or triple the value, I guess, if you consider all the different pieces of Adobe that are going to be represented at that conference. I do want to start off with a quick poll here and just ask the audience quietly, how many of you are planning to attend Adobe Summit in March? And just to respond back here, yes, no, or I'm considering it. And then if you are considering it, that intent of our next session is to help give you a bit of a primer as you're kind of planning your time with that, and also to kind of get things going here. So it's looking pretty good right now. Looks like, let me leave this open for another 30 seconds here, just as we're kind of getting responses. And then we'll publish this out. And if anybody has any questions about Adobe Summit, about what that process is like, we have a couple of people that are on the call here who have either presented at it or have been kind of perennial attendees at the summit. So there's a lot of resources you can ask during the question and answer period here. So I'm going to shut this off in 3, 2, 1. And polling right now. So it's looking pretty good. Looks like we're skewed about 60-40. People are saying yes and no. Don't see a lot of people that are on the sidelines per se on this. But let me just show the results here. And that way you guys can kind of see where we're at. And hopefully, again, those of you, I know it's a bit of money to lay out to be able to come to it, but definitely worth your while. And I can tell you, having gone last year, that I learned a lot more about Marketo and about the entire technology process as a whole. So I'd highly recommend this. Now, as members of a mug, also want to extend to you, we have a promotional code that's available. So if you want to go, we can give you $700 off the actual ticket price by using this code here. And we'll talk a little bit more in a second actually about that. So just to lay out the schedule here, the summit's running across 5 different days, and it really goes from Sunday to Thursday. A little bit different this year in that because the 2 of them are combined, the schedule is a little bit more fluid right now. So this is what I have to the knowledge that I have so far, but keep in mind some of the content on these days are going to change a little bit. And the big difference that I've noticed is that on Thursday, unlike previous years, the full Thursday is going to be used, and that's going to be focused mostly on Marketo sessions. So if you're booking your plane tickets back, make sure that you book them for Friday and that you book a hotel night to stay over Thursday night, because you're going to need that entire day, as most of those sessions on that Thursday are on the Marketo B2B track. And again, we'll have more about this next month's session.
Hey, Michael.
Yep.
Yeah, one additional comment that I think came out of a champion call was that even though Thursday is going to be a dedicated Marketo all the time day, I think there's going to be some speaking sessions during the week by Marketo folks as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I've just put Adobe sessions here, but really I don't really know what those sessions are. I think you probably have more insight into that, and everybody on the champion call would. So yeah, that's a great point actually. By all means, don't limit yourself just to that Thursday session, because there will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday content that will be valuable as a Marketo users as well. And then the last thing, just before we cut it off and kind of give the floor to Elliot, is Adobe Summit is, so we have a contest that's going on here. The most people that are referred from our Marketo user group, if we hit the largest number of referees, we actually win an exclusive party worth $2,000 from Marketo. And so if you are interested in going, you haven't bought your ticket yet, can you just shoot me a note? And I just want to add your name as kind of a referral to be able to say that, you're going to it and you're a Manufacturing User Group's member. And that'll help us get to that point. And it would be great to celebrate with all of you in person. And we will be working on planning a Manufacturing User Group meeting, so a cocktail hour. Is kind of what I'm thinking right now. It's a little tight with space, so I'm still working through the details on that, but I'm thinking like a nearby restaurant that will be close to the Wynn, where all of the Wynn Las Vegas hotel, where all of the Marketo sessions are going to be. But stay tuned for that. We'll have that probably in the next week or two as more information comes out. So that's all I have here. I'm going to hand it over to Elliot in a moment. Before we do that, I have one more poll that I've set up here specifically, and this is probably Elliot just to give some background for who's on the call. And I want to ask quickly about, in terms of the data that you're responsible for, nobody has to say who they are, but do you work with just your data as a manufacturing organization, or do you also work with data from, say, your resellers or retailers or any of your distributors as well too? I think that's kind of an interesting point to note. It's a little bit different than some of the other verticals that operate in Marketo, is that, your data, you maybe have a model where you help to be able to propel some of the data coming through your sales channel, and maybe somewhere you're not. So that's kind of an interesting nuance in the manufacturing space, I believe. I'll leave this on for another 15 seconds here. Okay, I'm going to cut it off here. And just to kind of show on that, it looks like most people manage their own data, which is probably great, probably saves a lot of, in terms of data governance and things like that. That's going to help a lot. So Elliot, at this point, I'm going to introduce you. You're in charge of oh, I have the wrong title on this, and I apologize for that. But you're in charge of marketing operations for RingLead. Really great to have you here, and would like to be able to kind of set you up with a screen share and then have you take the floor. And welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Can everyone see the screen?
I can see it.
Okay. I will take that as affirmative for everyone then. So, and Michael, my apologies. I definitely wanted to have some polling questions. I'd love to interact with the audience, but since it's a relatively small group, maybe we can either do it through chat responses or just verbal response. Before we get started, one of the things that I wanted to find out is how many people in the audience have relatively new Marketo instances that haven't been around for 2+ years. Is there anyone with a relatively spanking new instance? Oh, that's good.
Only a year.
Oh, only a year, okay.
Yes, we instituted January of last year.
Ah, hey, Jeff, thanks. So, so some of this may not apply to you as much because as relatively proficient Marketo users, being in interacting in user groups and so forth, you've probably already implemented some processes in place. And certainly when you first start using Marketo, especially in your case where it's a brand new instance, you're all optimistic and Marketo is going to lift you up and make your world rainbows and unicorns. But over time, or especially if you've gotten an older instance of Marketo that you've inherited, it can become a burden and your dreams of rainbows and unicorns have been dashed. So what we're going to try to do is try to get you back into that swing of things by a few tips here. Now, most of these tips, or many of these tips, I'm sure are no big surprise to many of the folks, being that you're in a user group here and have probably done a lot with data quality initiatives and so forth. But there might be some insights you gain and some questions you might have. And definitely if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. or chat, and we can cover questions at the end. So the first step, one of the big steps to cleaning up Marketo, starts with creating a smart list to identify records that don't have email addresses. At RingLead, where I work for the last couple of years, I've done dozens of onboardings with pretty good sized companies. Quite a few of them are very large. And frequently the people running those instances don't even think about this and don't even realize that their database has got a large percentage of records without an email address. And in many cases, those records really aren't of much value. You can't send them an email. Likely you're not going to be tracking page visits from these and so forth. So one of the very first steps is to identify if you have very many records without an email address. And if you do, and you don't need them around for any kind of historical reporting, you can definitely purge them from Marketo at least. Now, it's typically a lot of times the way records come in without an email address, potentially it's list import. Obviously, if you're importing lists, you really don't want to be importing records without an email address. Generally, almost always, your forms are going to require an email address, but a lot of times these are coming from Salesforce, and salespeople are creating a placeholder. Maybe they have a phone number, no email address, they create it. Next thing you know, it's in your Marketo instance, taking up space. And if this goes on for months and years, you can wind up with a very large number of records like this. So one of the things that you could do is purge these out. Now, let me ask this question. Is there anyone here that's not using a sync filter between their CRM and Marketo, Marketo sync filter? All right, so I'm going to assume that everybody here has a sync filter, and indeed you find that a lot, especially with Marketo's pricing model based on the number of records that you have in your database. And the sync filter is a great thing because it can allow you to get rid of those placeholder records that sales have created from Marketo, but not affect them in your CRM. So you definitely want to make sure that you set that sync filter up to prevent those records from syncing back into Marketo after you delete the records. Any questions anybody has about this part? In fact, a lot of people, the sync filter they have and don't even realize it. They're like, no, I don't have any records without an email address. And you say, well, do you have a sync filter? And they're, no, I don't think so. And it turns out, yeah, they do. It's based on the email address field. The very most simplistic sync filter that typically gets set up frequently is a filter that says if the email address is empty, don't allow the record to sync to Marketo. So moving on, the next one that's almost as bad as as no email address is invalid email addresses. So again, you can create a smart campaign, or I believe there's a system smart list for that. It's the bounce records, and that will show you those records that have email invalid set. Now, Marketo sets this value automatically if there's a category to bounce. And I like to let Marketo take care of that and not set other or have other situations on a record also change the email invalid field value to true. For example, I've seen some instances where people said, oh, if I have any hard bounce or soft bounce, change the email invalid field to true. Well, that is really not a good idea, because soft bounces are things like, hey, the guy's mailbox is full, try again later. Well, you really don't want to make it invalid in that case. If it's a hard bounce other than category 2, i.e. category 1, that's a spam bounce. And again, just because you got a spam bounce doesn't necessarily mean, it definitely doesn't mean that the email address is invalid. Definitely, you probably don't want to keep emailing that individual, at least until you get your sender reputation cleaned up. So I'll show you in a little bit a way to deal with those records. So just allow Marketo to do its thing with the email invalid. Don't use this. Definitely you can use marketing suspended for other situations where you want to stop emails going out, but leave the Marketo email invalid alone. And the same thing with this, if you delete records from Marketo after you no longer need them in there for historical reporting purposes, you can set that sync to Marketo field value to false in Marketo and give it time to sync on over to Salesforce, and then you can purge these records from Marketo. And in fact, you might want to even do it rather than a single flow action, actually create a smart campaign. And then even though in the results tab, the person's name and phone number and all that will not be present, you'll see ID entries for every record that you purge through that smart campaign. So at least historically, you can get some sense if you're trying to look back for the year and tell, from a performance standpoint that, hey, we purged out 10,000 bad records out of our system, and this will give you some ability to attribute that. So the third step to look at, again, very closely aligned with invalid emails, is a negative email verification. I'm going to ask another question here. Is there anybody that is not verifying emails, not just the format of the email, but actually utilizing a email verification service like RingLead, Informatica? There's several zero bounce that can do that. Is anyone using a verification service for that?
I've seen Kickbox.io used in the past to be able to kind of do that. I think they have like an API with Marketo, or you can webhook your Marketo leads to them if you want to go that way as well.
Right. So the email verification, I see, let's see, who was it? Dan is using Informatica. And Dan, are you using Informatica at the form level?
No, we actually use it at the batch level. So we'll run a series of batch campaigns over the weekend to just ensure that emails are valid.
Got it. Well, the beauty of doing it at the form level is that if somehow you had a bot or something submitting spam trap emails into your database or through forms, you'd have an additional level of security before that record came in, and you could prevent the record if it came back with a negative verification value. Because actually, and I'm sure a lot of you have observed this, the most common issue for an email invalid is a top-level domain has a typo. Instead of .com, it's .con. It's some key very close to the M, and similar type typos. So if you do it at the form level, you actually ensure that you're going to get a good email address and not allow a potential spam trap email address to come into your system. But if you do it at a batch level, or in the case, say, of RingLead, we have a webhook that you can call at the very moment that a record is created and do the verification so that you don't send an email to a spam trap address. This is a representative setup of the kind of smart campaign that you would set up to toggle those. And this is probably the one exception where if it was a negative email verification, I might set the email invalid value to false or true rather, and allow the record to not be sent. But you could accomplish the same thing through marketing suspended. I believe you can set the email invalid cause. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, even though there's a marketing suspended cause field, you can't actually write into that field. So I'm not sure what the value of that is. And this would be then, of course, the flow action where if you do have a record that comes back with email invalid, that you'd set it. Now, email invalid, there's certain codes that come back to indicate that. And you might actually have a valid email address, but it comes back as a spam trap. So again, be careful when you're setting these up. You don't want to just say, oh, okay, it's valid, no problem. You definitely want somebody that can also give you some insight as to whether it's a seed or a mole or a spam trap or something like that. And again, these records potentially, once you've identified them as not something you're going to want to send an email to, or that you can't send an email to. You really don't want to send an email to an invalid email address because it's going to bounce and it's going to affect your sender reputation. So we definitely don't want to do that. So you'd set that email invalid, and then those could be purged out. Or you could set marketing suspended. Another value that you might want to set is no longer at company. So certainly your salespeople in general are a front line for identifying if someone's no longer there. You can do it through a checkbox. You can do it through a lead status or lead substatus type pick list option. But somehow you want to be able to flag these records that are no longer at their company, and you definitely want to set up a smart campaign then, again, that if that value changes to no longer a company, you change the marketing suspended field value to true. The other way that you can identify records that are no longer a company is to use a auto response or auto reply handling service like LeadGnome or I can't remember the name of the other one. Is anybody using like a automatic bounce back service that analyzes records to see if they're coming back as no longer a company? I would definitely recommend then anybody that isn't using that should definitely look into it. It's LeadGnome, and there's one other service. If anybody remembers at least one other service, what that might be, definitely shout out. Uh-oh, wait, I'm not scrolling down my comments. Unbounce, okay, Unbounce has it. And there was one more I was thinking about. I can't remember the name off the top of my mind. Percuto? I didn't know Percuto did that, but that's an interesting thing. I'll have to check that out, Jeff. Thanks.
And Elliot, can I ask you then about that? So that's different than sending an automatic response if somebody triggers out a form fill and then kind of letting Marketo read back whether that's a soft bounce or not?
Well, what happens is it doesn't go. So somebody fills out, or you send an email. So it's not really related to a new record typically. It would be where you send an email and 80%, 90% of the auto replies that you get back are going to be, oh, I'm on vacation, I'm on maternity leave, whatever, I'm on a business trip. But 10% roughly of those a lot of times, and 3% of your records, by the way, every month degrade as far as data, whether it's they're not at the company or some of the key data, contact information goes away. So a good percentage, maybe up to 10% of the bounce back replies when you do an email blast might have certain phrases, say, Jane Smith is no longer at the company. So that would automatically trigger a service like a LeadGnome and this other company, I can't remember off the top of my head, but anyway, it would trigger them. They would get those bounce backs. So the reply to on those emails would be intercepted by that other service. They would parse the body of the return email, and they would see those key phrases. In fact, before they had these services, I had all the bounce back replies come to my email address, and I had in Outlook, and I had filters, and I would look for those keywords, and I'd move those records into different buckets or folders in my email, and then I could identify those people that were permanently gone, and I would have like an intern or something mark those records as no longer with company. And even better, and services like LeadGnome can do this, they can see if, oh, now this person's not there, so please contact this other person. And that other, Jeff's funny. So at least then it will actually automatically create a new record for the new contact at that company, which is like a really big deal. So at a minimum, you get a bounce back, you see they're no longer at the company, you want to flag that record as no longer a company, you want to call into the company if you don't know who the new contact is, and if your champion is left, you want to see who the new champion is at the company where that person left from, and then you want to follow that person to their new company because they may be a champion for you at that new company. So that's a great practice that I've used. And again, it can be automated quite a bit by some of these other online services. All right, so the next step that we have are people that unsubscribe. So certainly people that unsubscribe could also include people that are your customers. So you definitely don't want to be deleting records for customers, because even though they've unsubscribed, if you have operational emails, you can still, Marketo will allow you to send those operational emails as long as you mark them that they're operational to these individuals. But anyone that's a prospect that's unsubscribed, then again, you're not going to be able to send them email. It's almost like the email invalid. Leave them in Marketo till you've maybe identified the sources. You've gathered some data on where common sources or common campaigns that result in large unsubscribes. So you can take some action on that data. But once that data has been pretty much accumulated or stored and you're used, then feel free to remove these records. Again, remove them at a minimum from Marketo. You may want to leave them in Salesforce, again, because especially if they have a valid email address or a valid social address. More and more, sales doesn't just rely on email and phone. They now have the ability to utilize social. So very important, if you're not doing it, to also look into, in addition to email verification, is to look at enriching contact data where you can get social contacts. That provides a great third source for being able to reach out and contact somebody, or at a minimum, link into them. Don't spam them, obviously, through InMail. Nobody enjoys that, but follow them and like things they do and establish some sort of a relationship before you try to engage them and become too crass in commercial with that individual. So this one now would be the bounce handler. Actually, it's funny, Joe Reitz wrote a blog article recently in the Marketo community he called it the bounce house, and it was kind of funny, but I took exception with a couple of the things that Joe was doing. I think he was permanently flagging people that bounce as either marking a marketing suspend or email invalid. Again, I would go with suspend over invalid, but just because somebody's bounced with an email bounce category, and if you're using Marketo Sales Insight emails, you also want to include sales email bounces in this as well, because it will track those for sure. So trigger on those category 1 bounces, and then the next step that you would do in your flow would be to, say, change a score. And in this case, you might set up a score field called spam bounce count, and you'd increment it by 1 when they had their first bounce, and so forth. And then once you increment that, then as it builds up, you can create another smart campaign that gets triggered once that bounce goes over a certain threshold. And the threshold could be something like 2 bounces, could be 3 bounces. The main thing is you don't want to be tons of bounces, because the more it bounces, especially from a category 1 bounce, the more it can negatively affect your sender reputation, if not with global spam lists, with that particular email receiver and customer or prospect that you're trying to reach out to. So you would set up a smart campaign here. Once you've identified that they've crossed a particular threshold, that you could reset that spam bounce count back to 0 once they've reached, say, that threshold, and you've put them in marketing suspend for a period of time, and that would enable you to then allow them to come out of marketing suspend again and allow it again to see if they've gone back through and had more spam bounces. And if they do have more spam bounces again, then you might want to permanently suspend that person from receiving any additional emails from you, and ultimately remove them from your database, at least from Marketo if that's the case. And these slides, by the way, I'll make available so you guys can peruse some of these more complex flow actions that are here again, especially the spam bounce. It gets a little involved. Was there a question?
There was one question that came through earlier from Jeff, and was curious about purging of records, and was wondering if you're purging, do you still see the records? He was thinking that once you delete the records, they were gone from your results.
No, the results still will have the ID of the activity, but the record won't be there. I'm fairly certain of that. I've observed that behavior recently. And I don't know if that's sort of a new thing, because I was of the mind of Dan in the past that if you delete them through a smart campaign, there's nothing there anymore because they're gone. But I recently did a large delete and discovered that the records that were deleted through the smart campaign still had activity IDs, just no data associated with those activity IDs. And of course, there's no campaign members. So you can't look at the campaign member. You can only look at the results. So I believe that's correct, but definitely I could be corrected if that's not the case. The other thing that's interesting, I noticed some time ago, Marketo removed the ability to view anonymous records as they came in. But I discovered that if you had a smart campaign that set the or identified a record coming in without an email address, that you could add that record to a list and you would see an ID in the static list for that record. And then, of course, as they became known, the rest of the data in that list would populate. But it would give you a way to look at anonymous records individually rather than through the report. But I discovered recently that that technique didn't seem to work anymore. So again, Marketo may have made a tweak. I was actually kind of surprised that back door was left, but it looks like they've closed it, unfortunately. If anybody has any idea how to view an anonymous record, and of particular interest to me, outside of the report that you can get of anonymous visitors doesn't show the IP address of that visitor, and I'd like to see the IP of the address of that individual that's coming in. And so again, here you could either set up your smart campaign to make the in the flow action once they've bounced, not only once and you've suspended them, tried to clean up your center reputation, release them back out, they bounce again. You could either use the email invalid to do it, or you could put in a marketing suspended with a dedicated that said spam bounce after marketing suspend, and that way you would know that records with that cause for the bounce are records that potentially you should remove from that. So the next category would be, and probably most of you guys are doing this, would be any old unengaged records. So typically I'll set my threshold like the created dates no more than, say, a year, or no more recent than a year. Some companies where the sales cycle are short may even want to go with a 6-month window, that anybody that's in the last 6 months, then don't evaluate them for engagement to consider purging them. But definitely if they're years or more old and you haven't had recent engagement with that individual, you would want to consider removing them. And so these are a few of the activity-based filters that you could use. One thing that you notice here is that there is a not had an interesting moment. And I'll show you in a moment, not to be a pun, how you can leverage the interesting moment for data that's volatile that Marketo archives after 90 days, like page visits. So once you've identified those, you can potentially remove those records as well from Marketo. Finally, records that you wouldn't necessarily want to remove from Marketo, but from a data quality perspective is important. People do set up their behavioral scores frequently with a smart campaign that degrades the score based on inactivity, say no page visits, no form submissions, no whatever, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, depending again on how rapid the sales cycles are with those people. And if you allow your behavioral score to go below 0, then if they do re-engage, frequently it goes so far below 0, maybe they take a 6-month or a year hiatus, and then they come back, the behavioral score will never get back over 0 and trigger an alert to a salesperson or make it to be an MQL or something like that. So definitely inspect your scores and your behavioral scores for anything below 0. And if you do have something like that, then you want to set up not only set those to maybe a more appropriate value based on what their score would have been had it started at 0 over the last few months, but then you also want to build in some protection in your smart campaigns that are setting scores such that the behavioral score, if it already is less than a threshold limit that you're going to decrement it by, then you go ahead and you set the score to 0 rather than subtracting 11 points, you just set it to 0. So here's the interesting moment technique I was talking about. And so when you have web page visits, but they archive off after 90 days, how can you tell if somebody's visited your web page 6 months or a year ago? So the way I do it, and you could even be more granular, is at the end of every month, I have a scheduled batch smart campaign I run that looks back over the past 90 days. And of course, I exclude my unsubscribed my management center, but it looks back to find all the people that visited. And then I create an interesting moment, a web-based interesting moment, and I indicate here what date I set this. That way, I can use this as a constraint on the interesting moment when I'm doing my inactivity filter, if you have interesting moments that aren't related to activity. But this will ensure that at least on a 90-day basis, and again, you could set your this to run on a more frequent basis. The schedule here, as you see, it runs monthly, but it repeats every 3 months, and it runs just before midnight on the last day of the month, on that 3rd month. And I set it up for to run quarterly. And kind of the last step recommendation that I have for you, of course, is merging duplicates. And again, I'll ask for a hand raise. How many people don't have any duplicates in their Marketo? Exact email or anything. You can chat your answer, proudly chat your answer, or proudly shout out. And nobody. Guess what? Even RingLead has duplicates in our database. Now, sometimes we like to keep them there because we want to test things and so forth, but we do have a few duplicates ourselves. Well, what's your option? I mean, Marketo makes it really easy to see at least exact email duplicates, and the majority, I like Jeff, too many. I mean, if you've inherited an instance where you've got hundreds, thousands of duplicates, there's no way you're using this interface to resolve those duplicates. So, and most of those duplicates, because Marketo does prevent an exact email address from creating a duplicate, at least through a form and list import, that means those duplicates are likely coming in from Salesforce, or potentially through like a product database integration that you have, or a third party like Vidyard, for example, integrates with our database and creates new records in our database. We talked about LeadGnome earlier, and they are going to write new records potentially in your database based on an autoresponder email that comes back saying that a new person is now the appropriate contact person. So all these duplicates, now there's ways to prevent the duplicates beyond just the 2 options Marketo has. And of course, we'd invite you to take a look at RingLead and the tools we've got, but there's other solutions out there. Of course, there's, from a bulk deduplication standpoint, there's the Marketo offers a service for doing that. And I've even used that service many years ago but definitely there's some issues with the service from the standpoint of just how, I guess, interactive it is, because you basically need to provide data criteria that you want to use to Marketo, as you would with any tool to do the deduplication. They implement that. They make a run. They send you the data back. You have to review the data to figure out if you have false positives, if rules to make certain values survive instead of other values survive are correct. And if not, then you've got to iterate with them. And I think they allow you 2 or 3 iterations like that. And between iterations, it can be several days. So it can extend the process out. So some of these tools, deduplication test tools, you can actually do the iterating in real time. I mean, you can change a parameter on the matching criteria, do a run, see what the potential results might be, and within a few minutes detect that, this is causing false positives, make a tweak, rerun, and so forth. So definitely would advise checking out automated methods, or if you have a large number of duplicates, definitely the Marketo. Used to be called Easy Merge. I think they changed the name recently to something else Merge, but I don't remember what it is. But anyway, either way, I would encourage you to do that rather than just leave those duplicates pile up, because in the long run, just like empty email addresses, invalid emails, spam traps, and everything else, it's going to bloat the size of your Marketo database, and it's going to cost you money. So the last thing I'll talk about before I sign off here are, so let's say you've done some of these, you're going to do maybe some more, set up that bounce house, as Jeff called it, using some of the examples that I provided in the slide presentation. What kind of things should you do next? Well, we would recommend doing a comprehensive audit yourself of all of these elements within your database and your systems, including Salesforce, anything that's feeding into your documents. So this is a bit of a checklist, although obviously this is sort of the top level of the iceberg, or engaging with a third-party service provider like a demand gen or a Demand Labs or some Percuto or somebody like that to come in and do an audit on your system. And they can definitely help you to do the things that would help you to ensure that you've got really great data, that your segments are really nice and well structured, that your alerts to your sales people are timely and appropriate, and that your engagement is appropriate through appropriate removal of duplicates and appropriate segmentations and scoring. So that pretty much concludes, one more. So the bottom line of the results is you will be that unicorn with rainbows after you do something like this, and you'll realize a lot of results, beneficial results from having that audit done on your system, whether you do it yourself in a methodical manner or have a third party do it for you. So thanks very much. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those in the remaining few minutes.
Great, Elliot. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I think it's a great session, and love all the screenshots too of your actual smart campaigns and how you're doing that. So I think that's going to be really great. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot, not just on the recording, but then also on the slides that you're sharing as well. I want to ask a question right away, if I can, about your behavioral scoring piece about negative behavior scores. Really like that a lot, and it reminds me of the conversation that Sydney Mulligan and I were having with Taylor at the North American Virtual Mug. You can look the recording for that online. But we were talking about how that impacts the flames and the stars that you see in Marketo Sales Insights for your salespeople as they're trying to kind of work through their leads afterwards, and see that in their Salesforce instance. And so my question to you is, how do you determine the threshold? I think in yours you had -11 as the threshold that you'd kind of reset that back to 0.
Right.
You know, do you use a histogram, or how are you determining what that threshold should be?
So that threshold actually so there was a score, that was a scoring smart campaign based on, I think it was web page visits, I can't remember. And the idea was that if I have a decrementing smart campaign that says, okay, I've got an incrementing smart campaign and I give them 5 points every time they visit, but if I wait a month and they haven't visited in a month, I take away 12 points, right? Mm-hmm. So if their score is 11 or lower, and I take away 12 points, their behavioral score is going to go negative, sorry. Mm-hmm. So that's why I put that choice in there to say, oh, but if the score is less than 12 and I take away 12, I'm going to get, so instead of taking away 12, I'm just going to set that particular element to 0, that particular behavioral element scoring element to 0.
Okay.
And also one thing, again, back on the merging, one thing I would caution you guys about is when you're doing merging, be sure that you're using a tool or you're doing it manually if you're merging it that will actually add behavioral scores together, give you that option, and they will also allow you, in the case of a firmographic score, to take the higher of the two firmographic scores when it does the merge. Regardless of which record, say, is the master record, it'll always preserve the higher firmographic.
Great.
There was one other question here from Jeff as well. When does the Canadian legislation come into effect again? And what needs to be done to prepare if they're not dealing with, California, thank you, Jeff. I was wondering, I was like, Canada's already come into effect. Yeah. And what needs to happen whenever, if they're not already dealing with the GDPR in EU currently?
Right. So, oh boy, if they're not dealing with GDPR in EU currently, they better not be sending any emails to GDPR countries, which is another reason if you've already got legacy data that doesn't have country fields, you definitely want to go back and run an enrichment process, do that, or you could wind up like Google owing, what was it, $50 million or something. So it's really getting pretty serious. In fact, Inga Romanoff and I, Romanoff Consulting, next month are going to be doing a webinar on Marketo, maintaining Marketo data in the world of GDPR. And certainly Castle is a component of that, and now potentially California. Now, I don't know when the go live date on California is, but it adds yet another burden to marketers to not only now in your forms, in theory, should have a country prompt, and at a minimum, you've got I can't remember what it's called, but in your Marketo form, if a certain visibility rule, if a certain country is selected, EU country, then it'll prompt up an opt-in consent prompt, whereas you're not required to do that if they're coming from the US, but you are, like, pretty much for Canada and definitely any EU countries, and you'll need to do that for California. So in California, now you're going to also need to ask what state are you coming from, and they're going to need to have that opt-in, or you're not going to be able to send emails to people in California. And just like GDPR, there'll be a period where you can send emails to people and ask that they opt in before you get cut off and can't send them any more emails. And you try to do that in a professional fashion that explains the value of them being in your database. And if they don't buy into that and they don't choose to offer consent, probably good. They really weren't a legitimate prospect for you anyway, and they're taking space up in Marketo and costing you money. Hopefully that answered your question, Jeff.
Okay, great, guys. Well, I want to be respectful of the time, and so we'll just do a quick screen share to kind of cap it off a little bit here. And if anybody needs to go because of time, totally understand right now, that's fine. We will end the recording at this session, do a quick group discussion, and then kind of take everybody back to just close everything out. But we hope you'll join us for our next manufacturing user group, again, February 21st, which is a Thursday, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 Pacific. And our topic at that point is all going to be about Adobe Summit. And I'm going to be reaching out to a couple of people on this call just to give some details if you'd like to jump in on that as well too, because there's a couple of people that have been going to that session a lot. So thank you all for your time from that side of things. And so what I'm going to do now, again, I'm going to pause the recording, and then we're going to talk about all the stuff that we don't necessarily want to talk about on a recorded session, and you all can answer whatever questions you have on your specific instances, and we'll do our best to be able to answer some of those right now. So we are off. Okay, so we're back recording, and again, thank you all for the discussion. Really interesting one. Went into a lot of different spaces about GDPR again and data privacy, and then also how data hygiene is required for data governance issues. And so maybe that's a prelude to a future conversation. We'll end things off again. Their next meeting, February 21st, all about Adobe Summit. We'll be lining up presenters and panelists, is the format we want to put together for that one. If you're interested in being a panelist to talk about your previous experiences at Marketo Summit and even Adobe Summit, would love to be able to have you come out. And so if you reach out to me, again, Michael at conversionstore.com, I would love to be able to get as many people on a discussion about that as possible. I think it'll help us all as we're all preparing for our first Adobe Summit at the end of March. And then final slide here is may all guests who enter leave as friends. Thank you for coming today. We really appreciate you spending the time. And if you're watching the recording on this, thank you again for sticking around and sticking through this session. If you have any questions, post those up in our Marketo Nation chat room. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one on February 21st. So thank you all very much. You guys have a great day.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Yep. Thank you, Michael.
I guess.